I just thought I would do a quick video on how I, as a watch collector that doesn't flip watches, who buys them with no expectation of ever reselling, makes my purchasing decisions. Hi, welcome back to Not So Obvious Watches. I'm Pete McConville. This video was inspired by a comment that came up on a stream I was myself commenting on. So it was a stream one Wednesday night watch talk on Amin Reviews, a channel I highly recommend, a show I highly recommend, mainly because because it's really interesting, and also because I was on it last week. So there'll be all sorts of links in the show notes below, both to Amin's channel, but also to the channels of the other guys I was chatting to. All really interesting guys, all with really interesting ways of looking at the watches. It was a really good talk. Go check out their channels as well. And I'll talk more about them and the rest of that channel in another video later. But anyway, coming back to this, they were having a chat about buying and selling and collecting, and I just made the comment in the comments that as a collector that doesn't flip, sometimes these discussions kind of leave you feeling a bit odd, a bit sort of isolated from the mainstream. And there was some discussion about that, but there was a comment that came back, which was, whilst it was all they could see the attraction of not being involved in the buying and the selling, it must put a lot of pressure on the buying decision. And that's absolutely true. I have found that when you're thinking that every time you buy a watch, that money is gone forever, you're never getting it back. It is that, and your collection is growing and never really getting smaller, that decision becomes all the more critical. And this is some of the tools I've used to help me through that. So if you're a flipper and you're just interested in how someone like me operates, or if you are someone like me and wonder if I've got any tools you could use, here we go. Okay, so the first thing is, I know who I am. I know the kinds of watches I like to buy. I know what my budget is. I've got that all kind of sorted. I've spent a lot of time thinking about it and wargaming it and coming up with some rules around how I will collect. Now, my personal rules then become a bit of a plan. So for me, it's about knowing I tend to attach myself to a couple of brands. So what I've done is I've found some brands that I am confident will have a range of watches both in their past catalog and in their current catalog, and given their trajectory in their future catalog, that I am likely to connect with. So for me, that is Fortis, Alpina, Seiko, Mueller Glasuta, Breitling. That's kind of like my core. I focus on them, but I also don't isolate myself to them. I also have some other categories of watches I really like. I like what I'll call dressable tool watches. So sports oriented watches, which can be dressed up, but have like 100-meter water resistance, can take a bit of a punch, and come from unusual brands that aren't necessarily commonly discussed. So then I'll start looking at, and I also, by the way, also really like GMT watches. So I'll kind of keep an eye on GMT and dressable tool watches from less commonly accepted brands. So I'll keep an eye on Chopard and Bell and Ross and other bits and pieces, Jean Ricard. And so I kind of have this idea of where I scan. So having done that, what I then do is I create a list, and I start with looking at that kind of across the board. This is kind of what I like. And I build a list of, actually it was close on 100 watches I would love to own. And then I start with 100, and then I just let it sit there, and I come back over weeks and months looking at watches, thinking about watches, going and finding them and looking them in real life if I can. And that list just gets smaller and smaller and smaller. And then it gets down to round about 20 or 30 watches. Then once I've got that list and I've got here's 30 watches that cover all sorts of price ranges. They can be as little as $500 as much as, I think my maximum is around about $10,000 dollars for a watch. I've got this spectrum of watches. I then basically cut them in half. And those are the more expensive watches at one end and the less expensive watches at the other end. And then I start thinking about the two watch collections, if you like, two watch plans as two categories. And I actually have two separate PayPal accounts which I use to save for each. So I run a PayPal account that I use to put money into regularly, top up occasionally as a watch buying for cheaper watches, and I run another completely separate account which I use purely for more expensive pieces. Clearly I'm going to be hitting this one more often, this one less often, but what it means is you can kind of balance your desire to have one watch every now and then, and not be kind of on this permanent watch fast as you're slowly but surely building towards a very expensive piece in the future. So I start with my list. I might have 20 watches on it, cut it in half, low end, high end, and then run separate savings accounts for each as I slowly accumulate the money I need for those. That way I can kind of scratch my itch on making a purchase every now and then, whilst at the same time working towards watches I really want. What I would also, I shouldn't say really want, working towards the more expensive pieces I really want. And a really important part is I want all of those watches. The watches on the cheap end are not substitutes for the watches on the expensive end. I never say I want, these watches are never going to be on my list, but I'll use them as an example. I never say I really want a Rolex on my expensive list. I'll put a Tudor on my less expensive list to get me through until I can swap over. They are never replacements. It'll be like I really want an SBDC 63 Seiko, which is about $1,000. That's on my cheaper one. And I'll have like half a dozen watches like that on my cheap one. And then there might be on the more expensive side, a Grand Seiko Diver, which is $10,000. One is not a replacement for the other. There's just a couple of these which will come in as I'm in the process of just, saving for the more expensive watch. So that's kind of the beginning of the list. Then what I do with each list, I have three grading system, which is under review, certain to buy, on plan. And I just color code them as amber, green, blue. So amber means you're under some sort of review. I'm thinking I'll buy you, but I'm not really committing yet. Green means I'm almost certain to buy you if and when that comes up. And blue or on target means I'm actively saving for that. I might be in some sort of negotiation with the buyer, with the seller. I might have found the store and now we're just talking about price and I'm getting close. And so what I do is I just track against those. And you're just periodically coming back and looking at the watches that you had under review and the watches you were certain, and asking yourself, do I still feel that way? And is that what I'm still interested in? And you let that sit for months, years. That list, that process has now been in place for around about 2.5 years. And since I've developed that process, I have not made a single buying mistake. Every watch that I've purchased has been something I've been, even now 2.5 years later, really still in love with, because by the time you got to the position of I really want you, you've been tested and tried and reconsidered and on and off the list for some time. Does this mean I can't make impulse buys? No, it doesn't. And that's the beauty of it, because like everyone, I'm susceptible to the impulse buy, but I've now got a list from which to make that. So if I'm cruising Chrono 24 or if I'm cruising eBay and I suddenly come across this watch that I really love, I really want it, invariably I'm looking at the watches which are on my list so I can go, yes, I'm positive I want that because I've been watching this watch for a year, 18 months. I know it is something I want. I hadn't been expecting to buy it now, but it is suddenly available at a price or in a way which I really want. So my impulse buy is not so much buy a watch completely out of the blue, but rather take a watch which I've been thinking about, which was possibly in the plan for a year or two from now, and all I do is drag that forward. And by doing it that way, I'm confident, I'm really confident I'm always buying watches I truly, deeply want, All I'm really doing is just messing with the order in which I will buy them. That process has worked for me. I would recommend it for people like me as something to try. Maybe it'll work for you, maybe it won't. If you're not like me, but you're curious how someone like me makes my decisions, that's how I'd make it. Some things which work, the reason why this does work for me is I'm very lucky in that my tastes align with what I can afford. So this isn't going to work if all I wanted to buy, all I really was attracted to were watches of 20,000 US and above. Obviously, if that's the plan, I'm not in a financial position to be impulse buying those ever. I would have to if that was me, my plan wouldn't work, or I would need to start robbing banks or do something really shady to fund this hobby. Likewise, I have no interest I'm almost repelled by hype watches. So if watches become super popular, they burst onto the scene and it becomes the must-have watch, that's a guarantee that I don't want it. I will actively not want that watch merely because it is a hype watch. That's a great thing for me. That really, that predilection, that natural desire kind of works in my favor and how I like to buy watches. God forbid I ever actually do fall in love with like the latest Black Bay or something. I'm in deep trouble. My whole system will fall over. But my personality type is that's unlikely to happen. So anyway, as I said, that's how I do it. If you've got other ways of managing how you make your purchasing decisions, how you narrow down, love to know about it. I realize mine is completely over the top and it's very like engineering of me, but it also suits me. And it actually, yes, it's intense, but then that becomes part of the hobby, part of the game of being a collector, of establishing these rules and trying to play the game by the rules. That's another way I kind of think about that. Really interested in how you do it. So leave comments below. And how are you much more impulsive? Are you as careful as I am? Let me know in the comments below. I've been Pete McConville. This has been Not So Obvious Watches, and I'll talk to you later. Bye.